All right, hello students. I'm going to give you a little brief overview of Chapter 3, which is Associated Press Style and Conventions. So there are three most important concepts of media writing. The first one is accuracy. Your job depends on it. Jobs in mass media are dependent upon accurate and thorough reporting. You have to go into stories with an open mind. Don't go in with a preconceived notion of what you think you already know. You want to go in completely unbiased, as if you hadn't heard anything about the story before, which is how some of your readers are going to read the story. You want to ask as many questions to as many sources as possible. You want to do as much background research as possible. You want to do much of that background research before you start interviewing any of your sources. Once you get quotes, we're going to go over quotes and interviewing in a later chapter. But when you quote somebody, you of course take notes, right? With a pen and paper, but you also record it with your phone. Or some kind of recording device. That enables you to kind of check and double check all quotes, statistics, and claims from your sources. One of the worst things that can happen to you as a reporter is when you misquote somebody. Because if you misquote a coach, a politician, anybody, a judge, a lawyer, once you misquote them and that ends up being in print or on the internet, they're not going to talk to you again. So you want to make sure that you get all your quotes correct. You don't want to take them out of context. It's really important, and that's part of being accurate, right? If you're unclear about something, if you're not sure of a quote, then just do a follow-up interview if necessary. Just email your source, text your source, and say, hey, listen, I just want to make sure I got this quote right. We see that because a lot of reporters aren't as accurate as they need to be, and part of this reason could be because of the 24-hour news cycle, social media, etc., that shows that reporters want to get the scoop. They want to be the first one with the story. Which is important. It is important to, get that story before another reporter gets it. But if you get the story first and you get it wrong, that's going to ruin your reputation. We see this all the time. We saw this especially in the Kobe Bryant death, in which it was reported that many people had died during the crash, and it was just, a horrific error on that reporter's part. We know that trust in media is eroding. It's eroding every single year, and it's kind of up to us as the future journalists to kind of reclaim that trust. And part of doing that is to be as accurate as possible. 2, clarity. Stovall gives us these tips. You want to keep it simple, right? We talked about keep using the simple sentence as often as possible. You want to avoid any kind of jargon that people might not understand. You want to be specific, right? You don't want to say many people. You want to see 8 people, right? You also want to check the time sequence, right? Always make sure that things go in kind of like that you have your chronological order correct if you're talking about specific events. You want to include transitions, however, therefore, etc. You want to kind of put one thing logically after the other using some transitions. Sometimes if they go in an obvious order, you don't need transitions, but they're almost implied. You also want to take on the complex topic. Take on the complex topic, but by keeping it simple, avoiding jargon, being specific, you can make the complex topic easy enough for readers to understand it. A lot of readers for mass media, they don't have a lot of time. They're not looking for poetic language unless they're reading, maybe a feature piece or a magazine piece. But for newspapers, hard news stories, keep it simple. Make sure that that complex topic is easy to understand. As reporters, we report on the law. It's incredibly complex. We report on healthcare. It's incredibly complex. The tax system is incredibly complex. We want to try to take these things that are important to our public and make them, as simple as possible. The other thing is brevity. Again, according to Stovall, you want to get to the point, watch out for redundancies and repetitions, cut out all unnecessary words. For example, if somebody is going to write, the movie was incredibly very awesome, right? Well, all you have to say is the movie was awesome, all right? So those are some of the 3 most important concepts of media writing. Now, journalistic conventions, right? This is a set of rules that have evolved and are evolving since the first newspapers came out in the 1700s, right? Readers and editors expect the writing to be in a certain form. The form used for most hard news stories, crime, politics, healthcare, etc., is called the inverted pyramid, right? It looks like this. Information is presented in the order of its importance, where the most important facts, who, what, where, when, why, and how, go in the beginning. This makes it so that a reader can stop reading and still get all the most important information that they need to know. It also means that an editor can cut the story from the bottom to make room on the website or on the page for breaking news, or sometimes more likely that they just got a half-page ad and they want to run that ad, but they want to still keep all the important information there. They'll cut the story. Excuse me, and the story will still make sense. For leads, right? Unfortunately, if it bleeds, it leads. This means that we always start with the number of deceased and injured. They go in the very beginning of every story. You see this on Channel 6 News. They almost always start with a violent story, and they almost always go in the very beginning of the story. For example, you might want to look at this lead from Jeff Goldman from NJ.com. Quote, a 57-year-old man was killed and 4 others injured in a 5-vehicle chain reaction crash Thursday afternoon along Route 24 in Summit, authorities said. You start with the number of deceased, then you go to the number of injured, then you go where, and because that's information that came from a source, you attribute it, authorities said. We also want to look at how he uses inverted pyramid for the next paragraph. David M. Baum was driving in the eastbound right lane around 2 p.m. when his vehicle was rear-ended by a tractor trailer, state police said. Again, it's more specific because it's the second paragraph. It's also attributed. The article gets more specific, more and more specific and more detailed as it goes on. So Stovall also talks about balance, objectivity, and fairness. You want to give both sides of the story, even if it's no comment. This shows that you've reached out to people on both sides. If someone doesn't get back to you, which happens often, unfortunately, in this business, then you simply write, Senator Hughes did not return calls for comment. This shows that you've at least reached out to somebody from each side of the issue in order to give them the opportunity to respond. You want to try to be invisible in your writing. You want to be the fly on the wall. It isn't about you. It's always about the story. So you're never going to use first person I in a story unless it's a column, unless it's some kind of feature. You also don't want to state any opinion unless you are writing for the opinion page. That's why we have an opinion page, so that journalists like yourselves can give an opinion on something. But for almost all of the news stories, we're keeping opinion out of it. And we also want to avoid any kind of bias. For example, you never mention somebody's race or sexual orientation unless it is a part of the story. So always avoid any kind of bias. Attributing sources. All the information in the story, unless it has been based on your own observation, should be attributed to a person or document. This shows that you've done your research and it's going to make you a more trustworthy reporter. We want to use quotes from official sources. For print quotes, the attribution goes at the end of the quote. For example, quote, David Wilson has been granted a new trial, comma, quote, Philadelphia District Attorney spokeswoman Kathy Abakier said. Then you have her full title on the first reference, and then after the first reference, then you can just use her last name. For example, Abakier said that the new information presented to the district attorney warranted a new trial. Now, all of this is going to go into Associated Press style. Just like you use MLA or APA style for your academic papers, for news writing, we generally use AP style. Now, the New York Times has their own style, right? The Chicago Tribune has their own style. Gannett newspapers has their own style. But pretty much the generally accepted style for news reporting is the Associated Press style. So what you're going to do is you're going to use the Associated Press conventions that are given in the textbook. These are kind of the basic ones for numbers, titles, addresses, etc. And then once you start writing for an organization that uses AP style, you should go out and buy the most recent edition of the AP style book. When we were working in the newsroom, we certainly didn't memorize every single, do you capitalize the great oak tree? We would keep our AP style book by us at all times, and then we would often have to look up what form, what capitalization, abbreviations, etc. So if you're planning on getting a career in mass media, I highly suggest that you get that AP style book. In the meantime, you can, for the assignments for this class, you can just use the information in the chapter. So those are just some thoughts about Chapter 3. Keep up the good work and stay smart and healthy out there.